So in this video, I want to talk to you about this camera right here, the DJI Action 5 Pro, a camera I've been using for the last couple of months, and just give you my first impressions on it, how it's actually performed for me in the field, and just kind of share some overall thoughts on this camera. Now, before we dive into the full video here, I do just want to say this is not going to be like a massive in-depth technical review of this camera. We're not going to be like zooming in on footage and pixel peeping back and forth and comparing how it contrasts to like the Hero 13 or anything. There's plenty of videos about that already on YouTube. Feel free to go check those out if you want to. But what I like to do with my reviews, especially my camera reviews, is just give you a very practical in the field review of how this camera actually performs in the use cases that I use it for my line of work. So you can just kind of compare and contrast, would this camera work well for your use cases? Now, just to give you some context on what I do, I am a wedding filmmaker, photographer. I shoot some brand and commercial work. I am by no means some sort of like heli skier or like major surfer. I'm not doing a massive amount of action sports or anything. All the stuff that you see in the promo videos for these cameras, I'm not doing that kind of stuff. I'm filming weddings, I'm photographing weddings, I'm shooting photos and videos for brand and commercial projects and all that. And I'm running this YouTube channel right here. And I'm basically using these action cameras to just capture some behind the scenes POV style content that I can use for these videos here on YouTube, that I can create some shorts and reels for the brand, for the companies that I'm working for, that I can do some sort of like BTS kind of content for a wedding. That's the kind of use case that I'm using with these action cams. All right, let's talk about the Action 5 Pro. So I picked up the Action 5 Pro right when it came out, but previous to picking up this camera, I had been using the GoPro Hero 12 to capture all this behind the scenes content. And so what I want to do is just walk you through some of the reasons why I switched over to the DJI system versus the GoPro system. So the first major thing is low light performance. Without going into all the technical specifications, the sensor on the DJI system is a larger sensor than what's in the GoPro system, which intrinsically means you're going to get better low light. And for me, I shoot a lot of weddings. I'm shooting like getting ready content indoors. Even the brand and social content that I create, oftentimes I'm in cafes, coffee shops, inside of businesses and all that, where there might not be a massive amount of natural light. And so having a camera that's substantially better at capturing low light without having it be super grainy and washed out and crazy is really, really helpful. Another big thing for me is battery life. And I gotta say, having used this camera now versus my old Hero 12, again, I know those are two different generations, but the battery life performance on the DJI system is substantially better. And even looking at benchmarks from the Hero 13, which is the equivalent to the DJI Action 5 Pro, the battery life on the Action 5 Pro is substantially better. A lot of times I will just clip this camera onto my camera rig, click record, and just start filming and film for a multiple hour session. And this camera has never run out of battery when I've done that. The third major reason I switched over to the DJI system versus the GoPro system is the quick record functionality on the DJI system and how quickly this camera boots up. Like I said in the last point, sometimes I will just turn this camera on and let it record for a couple of hours, but on substantially longer jobs when I'm filming for like 10 or 12 hours at a time, obviously the camera's not going to last that long, nor do I want 12 hours of behind the scenes content to weed through. And so I will turn the camera on and off and record multiple clips throughout the day. And one of the features these action cams have is a quick record functionality where you can just press the record button and the camera boots up and starts recording. In my experience with the GoPro, the time difference between actually pressing the record button and having the camera actually boot up and start recording was actually quite a while, versus on the DJI, you press the button and about a second and a half later, if that, the camera's already booted up and recording. That alone is really, really helpful because it prevents you from missing moments. If there's something happening and you want to capture some BTS of that thing happening, you can just press the button and know the camera's going to almost immediately start recording. But additionally, the DJI software is really fantastic because on the GoPro, when you press the button to stop the recording, the camera automatically shuts down. And then if you want to restart, you have to let it shut down, press the record button again, go through the whole boot up cycle again. On the DJI system, the screen actually has an option where you can just swipe up, keep the camera on, keep it running, and that just allows you to keep recording clips, which is really, really helpful. Speaking of screens, the screen on the DJI is substantially better than the screen on the GoPro. It's a new OLED screen on the back. It's super bright. It's super crisp. You can see things really, really well. But even better than that, the front screen on the DJI, and not the GoPro, but the front screen on the DJI is also a touchscreen. And so if you mount this camera in your car, or you have it in a tight space where you're trying to change some settings, but you don't want to try to get around behind the camera, you don't want to pull it off the mount, it's really, really easy to just tap on the front screen, change your settings, interact with the camera, and you're good to go. And then the final thing for me was just the DJI ecosystem in general. I'm already pretty integrated into the DJI system. I fly DJI drones when I'm filming aerial footage. I'm shooting in D-Log for those drones. I'm using the DJI mics for some of my commercial and brand content, and having a camera where I can film in D-Log, have the same style of footage from the drones that I'm capturing, be able to seamlessly integrate the DJI mics with this camera is really, really helpful. And so because I'm already integrated into the DJI system, among all the other improvements this camera had to offer, I decided to switch to the DJI Action 5 Pro. So that is why I decided to switch to the DJI Action 5 Pro. Now let's talk about how the experience has actually been. As I've already mentioned, one of the major reasons I switched over to DJI versus GoPro was just the ease of use and functionality, and that has been really fantastic on this camera. Like I've already said, the screen is incredibly bright, super easy to use. The menu functionality is just way more intuitive than the GoPro menus seem to be, at least for me personally and how I read through menus. Being able to actually interact with the touchscreen on the front of the camera just allows you to change settings, adjust frame rates and composition and all that kind of stuff from the front of the camera if the camera's mounted somewhere. The quick record system has been really, really helpful. Just overall, this camera has been really, really easy to use. In terms of image quality, it's been really great image quality. Now, obviously, you kind of have to take this with a grain of salt because this is an action cam. It's not shooting the same quality of footage that's coming out of a more professional cinema camera, but I don't think you can really expect that from a camera like this. But for the use case that I have for it, behind the scenes, POV kind of content, it's performed really, really well. The log footage is pretty easy to use, very similar to working with log footage from the DJI drones. The color grading process is really simple and straightforward, and I've overall been really impressed with the image quality coming out of this camera. Moving on to low light performance, and honestly, I've been really impressed here as well. Over the course of the last couple months, I've filmed a lot in lower light conditions, whether that was at wedding receptions or in businesses, or even just for some personal stuff. And the low light capabilities of this camera have delivered great quality footage that I'm happy to showcase here on YouTube, or to deliver as a YouTube short, a reel, a TikTok, something like that. Now, I do want to share a few negative things about this camera because my experience hasn't been completely positive. And the first major negative thing that I found is just the overall resolution of this sensor. So the sensor on the DJI Action 5 Pro is a 4K sensor, and the max resolution that you can record is 4K, versus the GoPro, the 12 and the 13, max out at 5.3K. And while I'm not looking to deliver 5.3K footage, where this really comes into play is the stabilization options. On the GoPros, because the camera sensor is a larger sensor, you're actually able to set up your stabilization so that if you rotate the camera even all the way around, a full 360-degree rotation, the footage is able to stabilize with the horizon locked so that you have a level, locked footage even if the camera moves completely around the GoPro. This is particularly helpful for me if I'm trying to shoot some behind-the-scenes POV content when I'm out on a photo shoot, and I might be shooting in both horizontal and in vertical orientation. On the GoPro, I was able to set up the stabilization with a horizon lock so that even if I moved the camera into portrait orientation, the footage would actually rotate around, keep the horizon level, and I would still have normal 16:9 horizon locked footage coming out of the GoPro. On the DJI Action 5 Pro, because the sensor is only a 4K sensor, it can only achieve this 360-degree stabilization when you downscale the footage down to 2.7K, and the 2.7K footage just looks a little bit grainy and a little bit pixelated. Now, I've definitely used this. I'm going to show you some wedding footage that I shot on this where I had it set to 2.7K because I wanted to have the full 360 because I knew I was going to be shooting some photos in the portrait orientation. But for me, that's just kind of a loss because I would love to be able to still have my 4K footage with a full 360-degree rotation of the camera. Now, this only applies when I'm shooting photos because on video, I'm not usually rotating my camera like that, but it is one of the things that you should be aware of. You can't have a full 360-degree rotation stabilization in 4K on the DJI Action 5 Pro, and that's just because the sensor is only a 4K sensor versus a larger sensor. The two other gripes that I have with this camera are related to the mounting options. On my GoPro, I had a 1/4-20 thread on the bottom of the camera, so I could just screw this right into a tripod plate, and it made mounting super easy. On the DJI Action 5 Pro, there is no 1/4-20 thread. To get a 1/4-20 mount, you'd have to mount using the magnetic mount and then have a 1/4-20 below that, and that just increases the size of this camera, increases the number of pieces that you have to carry. I genuinely don't know why they just couldn't have included a little 1/4-20 thread on the bottom. It would have made mounting so much easier. And then my third gripe with this camera is actually kind of twofold, and it relates to the magnetic mount that this camera has. So on the DJI Action 5 Pro, there's a magnetic mount where you can just kind of clip on the mount and it just locks on magnetically. You want to take it off, you can just pinch it and it releases. It's super handy. It makes moving the camera from different mounts really, really easy. Unfortunately, this mount only works in one direction. So if you take the mount and you put it on and then you try to put it on the different way, like if you mount it incorrectly on the hot shoe or something, you're not able to put the camera down both ways. It's not a universal mount in that sense. Now on the GoPro Hero 12 that I was using, I didn't even have a magnetic mount option, and so I didn't really notice this, but the GoPro Hero 13 introduced a new magnetic mount system. Ironically enough, the GoPro still maintains their quarter 20 mount on the bottom, which is super great, but the GoPro's mount is a universal mount, meaning you can attach it magnetically either direction, which just makes it way easier when you're trying to mount things because you don't have to pay attention to which way the mount is located, because then the camera won't mount correctly. And then the other little gripe that I have with the magnetic mount is that there is no vertical magnetic mount built in directly on the Action 5 Pro. You have to use this little like frame cage that comes with it to have a vertical mount. So it's super nice that you can have a vertical mount, but unfortunately you have to put it in this little cage to be able to have that mount, which again, is just one of those quality of life things. It's a little bit annoying. Not a huge deal, but I wish they would have a magnetic mount directly on the actual camera so you didn't have to use this cage, add some extra bulk, add some extra weight. It's just a little bit annoying. But anyway, those are all my thoughts. If you have any specific thoughts, please leave those down in the comments and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.